Good evening all and welcome. I would like to extend to all my American friends a very happy Friends and Thanksgiving. I hope that you've all had a wonderful day, feel sufficiently stuffed, and are ready for some mouth-watering horror stories for dessert. Tonight, we also have the privilege of being joined by Daughter of Darkness on this festive day. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was 2, my parents and I lived in a house that my grandparents owned. Although only 2, I apparently could speak quite a bit, as well as a few sentences. My parents' bedroom was connected to mine through the closet, meaning you could walk into their closet, go through a door in the back, and end up in the back of my closet. Then, one day, my mum started having these terrible nightmares. In her dreams, she would wake up surrounded by fire. She'd rush through the closet to my room, scoop me up, and dive out the window. Suddenly it would flash forward, and her and my dad would be sitting in a waiting room at a hospital. A doctor would come in, look somber and say, "I'm sorry, but..." And then she'd wake up at that point, sweating profusely and her heart racing. One night she woke up to me screaming. She ran into my room and pulled me into her arms, calming me down and asking me what was wrong. My response was, Mummy, my room was on fire. I was on fire." Of course, this freaked her the hell out, and I'm willing to admit that me having some sort of similar nightmare may have been caused by me overhearing a conversation about my mum's nightmares. But that's not the freaky part. Not long after this, we moved out, though not because of the nightmares my mum was having. We lived in southern Illinois at the time, and my parents were having a hard time making enough money to support us living there, so we moved up to northern Illinois. My grandparents sold the house once we moved. About 6 months after we moved out, my mum was talking to my grandma on the phone. My grandma started telling my mum about how the house we used to live in had caught fire. No one was home at the time, but the bedroom that had been mine had been completely destroyed. The fire had started because of an electrical short in the closet, the one I spoke of before. Every time I share this story, it gives me chills.
This started just a few months into my relationship with my now ex-girlfriend. She told me about a recurring dream she'd been having for a few months. A little background: she and her family were messing around with the Ouija board, and it ended up giving them a lot of paranormal trauma. They tried to get rid of the board, but it kept showing back up wherever it was that they last used it. This all happened about 5 years before I even came into the picture. But as her partner, I felt it my duty to help her as best I could. Now, I have no prior experience on dealing with, let alone seeing, an entity, and the whole experience changed my life. My instincts told me to just place my head against hers and mentally project myself into the place that she described to me in her dreams. There was no real wall or ceiling to the place, only what seemed to be a very poorly built wooden panel serving as sort of a wall, and there was a door. In my mind's eye, I could see every detail as she described it. I looked at the door, and she was suspended above it. Once my eyes found her, she seemed to shoot towards the wall at full force, only to stop short and drift downwards. This left the door clear for me to open. I reached out and turned the handle. On the other side of the door was an entity that looked like it was made of smoke. The best way I can describe the shape is that it kind of looked like the old Gumby claymation cartoon, but that's just to give you a rough idea of how it was shaped. It then proceeded to try to stretch itself around me and I panicked. And once I panicked, I came back to waking reality, and I saw my girlfriend next to me. I told her that in this room, after I opened the door, I saw a bed with red silk or satin sheets. And after explaining everything that I saw to my girlfriend, she confirmed that there was such a thing in her dream. And she was amazed that I knew about the bed, because she didn't tell me about that part. It soon occurred to me that leaving the door open as I did could cause a lot of problems for her in her dreams. So that was my reasoning for being worried, and I really wanted to do a guided meditation on spiritual armor to protect against evil entities. So a few days later, I found myself in that room again. But this time, I was on the bed, and the smoky being was wrapping itself around me again. It was trying to possess me, but it couldn't. I always thought maybe it was because I said a prayer to Saint Michael. I began to panic, and I wanted that thing away from me. I started to feel a pressure building up in my chest, and at its peak, an explosion of white light expelled from my body, and it went through the door. Then, I closed the door and came back to reality to tell my girlfriend everything that I saw. That night while meditating, I had a vision. In the vision was a male figure illuminated by a spotlight. That's the best way I can describe it. As I drew closer, I realized it was a naked, bald being, and he seemed like he was in anguish. Now, this may sound weird to you, but my instincts told me to take this thing in my arms, hold it in a hug, and offer it love and acceptance. This entity, whatever it was, I'm not sure, melted into my arms and became made of light. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I've not told many people about this, and I'm a little nervous sharing it here. But I thought maybe some of you would have some insight on what happened, or at the very least, find it interesting. My girlfriend never had that dream again. We broke up not long after, but it felt really good, like I helped her, and it was a very powerful experience for me.
I was a pretty difficult teenage girl for my parents to manage. Around the age of 15, I was at the peak of this behavior. I was drinking with my friends every weekend, sneaking out of the house in the middle of the night, exploring the world of boys, and just getting up to no good. My grandma passed away when I was young, around the age of 9. She was my only grandparent, and we shared a really special bond. She had dozens of grandchildren, but openly favored me. She was eventually diagnosed with dementia, and towards the end she would call everyone by my name, even her own children. One night, when I was 16, I snuck out of the house to visit my boyfriend. This wasn't an unusual occurrence. I did this pretty regularly and had it down to a fine art. However, the only difference this time was that I needed to walk a few streets over and get a taxi because he wasn't able to pick me up. I stuffed some pillows under the quilt, put my hair extensions at the top to make it look like I was still in bed if my parents ever checked on me. Then I opened the window and started walking to where I planned for a cab to meet me. It was always an anxiety-inducing experience, but for some reason I was feeling really off about that night. I soldiered on. I'd only walked a few streets away from my house when I saw my mum was calling me. I panicked and started sprinting home, apologizing profusely to my mum on the phone as I was running. When I got back to the house, my mum was waiting outside. She was so shaken and was crying a lot. I felt so horrible. She said she had a dream that my grandma, her mother, walked into her room and prompted her to wake up and check on me. Mum said she jolted awake and went straight to my bedroom to find my pillows and extensions and the window slightly ajar. This experience really pulled me in line, and my relationship with my parents is wonderful now. It always had stuck with me and my mum. I often wonder what might have happened if Mum hadn't have had that dream. I imagine things would have been very different.
Something very strange has been happening to me since yesterday. First, here's some backstory. Number 1, I am not religious in any way, shape, or form. Number 2, I don't believe in the paranormal, but my sister does, very much so. Number 3, I've had premonition dreams before. The last one was in 2013. I was dreaming that my ex-girlfriend's brother crashed his motorcycle, and I found out later that it was happening in real time as I was dreaming about it. Before he even told me what happened, I told him where he crashed and that he currently had his bike's turn signal in his pocket. I was 100% correct. These type of dreams have happened to me before. Number 4, I had a really rough childhood with a father who should be in jail. His style of punishment was Guantanamo-style torture. But let's not dig into that too much, it still bothers me to talk about it. Number 5, I have extremely vivid dreams of being tortured, and I can actually feel it for about 20 minutes or so after I wake up. It's one of the reasons why I try to avoid sleeping. And finally, number 6, I do have a few mental health issues. Severe depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and a mild form of schizophrenia. But I am medicated for it. I've had several suicide attempts too. Now, on to the story. Yesterday I went to bed early, around 7 p.m., since I was mentally exhausted. I figured a nap would be nice. Around 3 a.m., I woke up full body crying with no sound coming out at all. I can't remember the last time I cried. In my waking life, I hardly ever feel pain at all. I've even popped my own shoulder back into place after a snowboarding accident, and I didn't even use over-the-counter painkillers. But right now, I have full-on unbeatable pain throughout my whole body. And when I go near certain things that belong to my deceased grandfather, or even look at them, I get a migraine. But 5 minutes after I get away from these things, the pain is gone. A migraine, something that normally takes many hours and medication to clear up, just goes away after I walk away from these things. Last night, when I woke up from my dream, my female dog, who always sleeps downstairs, randomly decided to sleep with me in my bed, and she would go through these short bursts of waking up fully alert and very protective of me. And when she did this, it felt like I wasn't alone in the room, and there was a sense of impending doom. And my other dog, the male, who's normally very affectionate, is acting like he doesn't know me. He seems afraid of me. I don't recall much about the dream I was having at the time, which is very odd because I normally remember my dreams very well. But all I can recall of this one was that some woman in black died, and when I noticed that she was dead, I woke up. This was not one of my normally vivid dreams. But ever since this dream, my house, which doesn't normally have any insect issues, has been infested with moths. And when I speak, they go away or they land elsewhere. But when I'm quiet, they try to land right on me, and they feel ice cold when they do. It's all so odd. I've been struggling to eat, and I took some medication in case I have a fever. Other than my mental health issues, which are controlled and treated, I'm very healthy. It's very rare for me to be sick. But I'll go to a doctor if the pain meds don't cut the pain soon. But the rest of this is really freaking me out. I don't use drugs other than my prescribed medication, and I don't abuse them. This all feels so weird. In addition to the extreme pain, things just feel so surreal. I don't know how to explain it really. I'm from the US, but for the past few years I've been living in South America, and I live in a very religious and superstitious country. But like I said, I'm not religious. Update. I went to the emergency clinic. They took some blood and gave me a cardiogram. Then they sent me home with some pain medication and a few other things. The results of the test should be ready within a week. The male dog still continues to look at me like I'm gonna hurt him and that I'm a stranger. My female dog has been standing guard near my bedroom door. She usually doesn't like to stay upstairs because it's so hot up there, but she won't leave my side. The migraines I was getting when I was near things that belonged to my grandfather have pretty much stopped. But just to be on the safe side, I rounded up the stuff and I had my uncle come and get them. He also killed the moths while he was here, about 20 of them at last count. But this body pain is what's really scaring me, since any pain for me at all is very rare. Back in September, I fractured my right hand and I rejected any painkillers that they offered me because it just didn't hurt. The doctors were so confused as to why I wasn't balled up in pain and crying. But now, I've been in pain for 2 days and I don't know what's going on.
I have experienced sleep paralysis twice in my life so far. I'm turning 22 this year. My first experience happened during the summer of 2015, and it was downright terrifying. It was before my senior year in high school. I had been watching horror stories on YouTube, which at the time was a very cool and popular thing. I came across a video by horror narrator Lazy Masquerade, 8 true, terrifying sleep paralysis stories. I thought to myself, sleep paralysis, what's that? I enjoyed the video and binged watched more horror stories after that. But I really like these videos and still do to this day. Less than a week later, I experienced it. I awoke at 4:30 in the morning. I was laying on my back, and when I went to move, I realized I could not. All I could do were move my eyes. That's when I see a dark figure. Tall. It looked like a man wearing a hoodie. Roughly 6'4", 250-pound man. I know that sounds cliche, but I couldn't see his face. He was looking down at me, and this experience probably lasted about 2 minutes. While I was laying there, all I was thinking of was this man could end my life at any moment. That's pretty much all I remember from that first experience. Kind of ironic how shortly after watching a video of sleep paralysis it happened to me. That was almost 5 years ago, and I recently had another experience. I had woken up a lot earlier than usual because my older sister was visiting us and had my niece and nephew over. It was 9 a.m. I visited for a little bit and caught up with family that doesn't live with us. My parents took them and my younger sister out for lunch. I didn't go because we wouldn't be back in time for me to get ready for work, so I decided to go back to sleep for 2 more hours, then go get ready. I woke up and thought I heard footsteps and a girl laughing. It wasn't my mum or any of my sisters, and I don't have a girlfriend. It didn't sound like the laugh from a girl I knew. I was laying on my back, with my head turned facing the wall next to my bed, but also facing my window and my futon. I could see my cat sitting on my futon staring at the corner of the room where my door was, and I realized I couldn't move. I tried. I was completely frozen. I could only move my eyes. I only heard the laugh 3 times, the footsteps twice, and it was all coming from the hall. My cat was staring intently at the corner. I couldn't face it. I swear I felt as if someone was in the room, which didn't make sense because even if someone was in our house, my cat would hide. She really doesn't like new people. This experience only lasted about 2 minutes. Next thing I remember, I could get up and get ready for work. I told my co-workers about it and we kind of just laughed and joked about it. My supervisor even told me a story that had happened to one of his friends, supposedly talking to Satan during a sleep paralysis experience. I told my family later that night when I got home. So yes, those are my two stories. It's weird how your mind can play scary tricks on you like that sometimes.
When I was around 10 years old, my parents, sister, and I lived in an old house in Belgium. My parents didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up, so they rented this place for dirt cheap until they were able to afford their first house. The upstairs bedrooms were basically just an old converted attic. It was one giant room that my parents and I slept in, and then there was a separate bedroom for my sister. As I got older, my parents figured I could use a little privacy, and my dad started to build a wall made of drywall that separated the big space into two separate bedrooms. Well, he finished the wall, but he never got around to putting in a door. The reason being, they had just purchased their first house, which was a huge renovation project, and they didn't want to spend any more money or effort on a house that wasn't even theirs. As a result, I slept in a room without a door for about 4 years, until the house was renovated and we were ready to move in. My room was long and narrow, and it had a bed with a little TV stand next to it. And I always slept facing that open doorway because it felt eerie having my back to it. I had a hard time sleeping, so I'd often stay up late watching TV, and my dad would come to the doorway, tell me to turn the TV off and go to sleep. For years, I had a recurring nightmare in that room. In the nightmare, I'd be lying in my bed under the covers, watching TV for what felt like hours. After some time, I'd hear footsteps coming up the stairs. Thinking it was my dad, I'd call out to him something like, "Okay, Dad, don't worry, I'm going to bed." At that point, an extremely tall and thin figure with no facial features would enter my room. This thing was pitch black, and it was so tall it had to duck down to make it underneath the door frame, and it had long arms with disproportionately long fingers. Once in the room, he'd bolt towards me with his long hands reaching out for me, and right before he'd get me, I'd wake up. I was so scared of these experiences that I didn't tell anyone at all about them at the time, for fear of upsetting whatever it was that I believed was trying to get to me. Now, here comes the really terrifying part. Since it was going to be a while before we could move into the new house, my sister decided that she wanted to paint her room. So she asked if she could spend the night in my room with me while the paint dried. So we dragged her mattress into my room and put it next to my bed. I was relieved not to have to sleep alone for once, since bedtime had become a bit of an ordeal for me. But later that night, my sister woke me up at 3 a.m., hyperventilating and crying her eyes out. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me that a large, dark figure lunged at her from the doorway, trying to get her, and she went on to describe my nightmare word for word. A couple of years ago, my sister and I had a long talk about how uneasy the upstairs in our old house made us feel, and how insanely scary that experience was for us. That upstairs had such a heavy, eerie energy to it. I've never experienced anything like it again. A lot of other scary stuff happened up there, but this was by far the most terrifying to me personally. I'm a pretty rational person, and I want to believe that the house was just creepy, and that's how my mind dealt with it as a kid. But at the same time, it really felt like something was trying to come after me. I've been thinking about visiting that house again, so I can tell myself that it was nothing more than a room, and there's nothing to be afraid of. But then, I don't want to mess with anything that could actually come back and harm me. If you've had any similar experiences, I'd love to hear about it.
Two months ago, my out-of-state cousin Nick and I met up in California for a music festival. Nick introduced me to a woman from his hometown, Monica. Monica was selling LSD, and I was curious. but I didn't know the first thing about buying stuff, so I got in touch with my friend Sasha, who lives a few states east and is more street smart. Sasha gave me good advice about best practices. She told me to ask about dosage, so when I turned to Monica, I asked about it. Monica told me she wasn't sure of the dosage. Actually, it was 1 drop on a sugar cube. I asked if maybe I should just eat half the cube to be safe, and she said it would be hard to tell where the drop landed, and she didn't know. So I shrugged, traded her for a pack of cheap beer, dropped acid and saw some bands, went home, and returned to my normal life. On December 16th at 5 a.m., I'm having an emotionally vivid dream where I had the following dialogue. Sasha died today. What? How? She wasn't sick, she overdosed. That doesn't make sense. Sasha knows her doses. That doesn't make sense. I have to talk to Monica. As in, Sasha's older sister, Monica. Oh God, no. And then I woke up abruptly and very upset. I couldn't shake the feeling until I eventually told Sasha about it midday. That same evening, Nick messaged me to let me know that Monica had passed away. She passed in a traffic accident at 10 a.m. that morning, about 5 hours after I had the dream. I found out because there was a news article about it. I mean, this is weird, right? Has this ever happened to anyone?
I've been having very strange dreams. It started a few years ago. At first, I thought it was just my vivid imagination, so I stopped watching TV and reading before bed. I started taking melatonin, but the dreams continued. So I thought maybe I shouldn't take any medication before bed, and I forced myself to sleep without them. It took a few days of insomnia and acting like a zombie, but it worked. I did finally get to sleep. But the dreams came back. In these dreams, I'm always a different person. I know it's me, but it's not my body. Sometimes I'm not even the same gender. It's like I'm actually sharing a body with someone. It doesn't feel like a dream, though. It feels like I'm actually living a day as someone else. I talk to their family and friends, go to work as them, take care of their kids. I've eaten meat, and I'm a vegetarian in real life. I went mountain climbing once, and I even have sex as these other people, male and female. Sometimes I wake up with residual feelings for some of the people that appeared in the dream, like love for a girlfriend or missing one of my friends. It always goes away during the day, but it's really strange. Yes, they could just be very elaborate dreams, but here's the weird part. Although I can't make any big, important decisions while I'm there, like killing myself, I have learned how to memorize little bits of information and research them after I wake up. There were 2 situations where I was able to do this. The first time, I memorized the name of the person that I was. During the dream, I signed some legal documents and I looked at myself in the mirror. When I woke up, I looked him up on Facebook and I found the person. He exists. We don't live in the same country or even on the same continent. He's in Canada, and we have absolutely no people in common, so I couldn't have known him before. After that, I went into denial. I called my psychiatrist and I discussed with him the possibility of my being a schizophrenic, but he thinks that's unlikely. And the second situation where I was able to do this, I went on Facebook during the dream and I added this person to my personal friends request list. And when I woke up, it was there. A Facebook friends request from a middle-aged man who lives in Argentina. I'm scared, and just thinking about sleeping makes me nervous. I didn't accept the friends request, but I am thinking of sending him a message saying, "Hey, I think maybe I was you for a day. Here's a list of things you did," and see if it was accurate or not. Would he even answer me? It's all so crazy.
Many people become familiar with the concept of astral travel. Supposedly, this is the ability to separate one's astral body. The only other way I can think to express it is the soul from one's body. So the soul can take spirit journeys to other realms while one's body is left safely at home. Shamans in many cultures throughout history have presumably trained themselves to take such journeys often in order to gain occult knowledge or insight about the future or about someone's health. In any case, there have also been reports of spontaneous astral travel where the event just happens to a person without their conscious control. People who suffer near-death experiences often report their souls rising up and looking down at their bodies below. I once had no opinion about astral travel. One way or another, I neither disbelieved nor believed it. I simply didn't know. Then, an experience happened to me. It started out much like any other night, except that I felt more tired than usual and had decided to retire early. I recall it was a lovely winter night, very close to the Yuletide, and a gentle snow was falling outside. I snuggled down in bed to listen to my favorite YouTube channel, preparing myself for sleep. I felt very comfortable and was drifting off when I felt an unaccustomed lifting and a sense of weightlessness. I felt as though I were floating and suspended in air, rather than sinking into the oblivion of unconscious as usual, and that my consciousness had shifted. I was hyper-alert, more even then than in a waking state. I opened my eyes, and lo and behold, I found myself floating near the ceiling, looking down at my inert body, peacefully laying in bed, fully illuminated by the glow of my laptop screen. I marveled at the situation. I had not sought this. I had not expected it. It was simply happening without any effort on my part. Oddly, I felt no fear, none at all. I just assumed I was dreaming. Was this what people call the lucid dream? Is so-called astral travel and so-called lucid dreaming one and the same? I had no idea. I just found myself, some part of myself, marveling at the experience. Two things I remember were the sense of weightlessness and lack of any physical discomfort. I felt buoyant and light, and rather excited by it all. I also felt a strong desire to leave, to fly. The nearby windows beckoned me, and before I knew it, I was on the other side of it. Opening it had not been necessary. I didn't feel the coldness of winter, but I was flying very swiftly through it, as if on the power of a single thought. Soon I found myself above a vast, dark ocean. The water looked very cold and unbroken, as far as my eyes could see. Soon I reached land again and found myself in a town. It wasn't any town I was familiar with. The houses seemed strange. They looked old. They were all covered in the same wooden clapboard sliding, stained deep brown and unpainted. All of these buildings were close together, attached in fact, as townhouses are. Some of the buildings had 3 or 4 floors, others were lower, but they were all attached. I don't know why, but I got the impression I might be in a Scandinavian country, although I'd never been there. The night was very dark, and it seemed very cold, and snowflakes were drifting around the air. I found myself being drawn to one particular lighted window among this pile of buildings, one of the taller houses. Before I knew it, I was inside the window and inside the house. It became apparent there was a party going on. It was the Yule party. There was much light, laughter, and chatting. People were moving about, sitting and standing with drinks in hand, all dressed quite nicely. I specifically remember a tall, attractive blonde man leaning against a counter that separated the wide entrance hall from the open-plan kitchen living room area where many people were. He was wearing a lovely knitted jumper, holding a drink and chatting with another man. I moved closer, only they had no cognizance of me at all. Clearly, I was not visible to them. I didn't overly marvel at this interesting situation. I more or less accepted it and moved on from room to room, exploring the house. What seemed most amazing to me was just how vivid everything seemed. I could discern every detail from my surroundings, the furnishing, the people, the activity. After making a circuit of the downstairs rooms, I came out once more into the wide entrance hall, which included a wide staircase of dark hardwood balustrade, with the same on both sides. The wood was rather scuffed and worn with age, but the whole house, although clearly older, was comfortable and had good vibes. There were 2 children on the stairs looking between the ages of 8 and 10, chatting and playing happily. I approached them with the idea of moving beyond them, and hence up the stairway to explore. But then something shocking happened. The girl looked straight at me, her eyes wide, her face filled with utter terror, and before I knew it, she screamed. This all happened so fast, I remember thinking, "You can actually see me?" For some reason, I was visible to this one child. In an instant, I felt myself being pulled back. It was rather like the sensation of a telescope being retracted. The entire scene before me collapsed, and then I was back in bed awake, with the voice from my laptop droning away next to me, much like I am to you now. This experience remains for me one of the most profound that I could perhaps label as paranormal, although it was very different to the ones that you usually hear about. Usually a narrator recalls an experience of seeing a ghost, often when they were a child. In this instance, albeit still alive, I was the ghost. It's perfectly natural, I suppose, for people to react with fear and shock when they see someone or something that shouldn't be there. I suspect I might feel the same. But I wonder if every encounter of this sort need to be seen as malevolent. Perhaps so many so-called ghosts are merely what I was on that particular winter night, an unexpected soul traveler who finds themselves glimpsing in places just as strange to them as they may seem to the rare and gifted person capable of detecting their presence. Since this time I have begun a course of self-training, and today I am capable of taking astral or lucid soul journeys at will. I've been to many places and met many interesting people on these journeys, and have gained much insight, but have never encountered the little girl again. My experiences thus far have shifted my former view of what I define as supernatural. Maybe someday such experiences will become perfectly natural, and maybe one day we will recognize ghosts as just fellow souls who, voluntary or not, have a go at parting some interdimensional curtain.
I'd like to tell this story and hope that someone can explain to me what it means, because it's been keeping me awake at night. A little while ago, somebody here wrote about this subject, and I could totally see myself in his story, and it freaked me out. This is the posting of his story about the weird dream that he had. This is almost like a nightmare, but different. I've had 3 dreams where it happened. The third one I had a couple of nights ago. I start off lucid dreaming, just normal dreams. Then it changes into something more. I was in a 1-room apartment with no furniture, and it's so run down, I remember having to tread carefully because the floor was so dirty, and it had a horrible smell. Then I saw 5 oddly shaped lumps under the carpet, and I didn't want to go near them. Suddenly, I'm overcome with the feeling like I need to hide, and just then, a humanoid-looking creature comes crawling out from somewhere. It has clothes hanging off its body, and it has wrinkly, sagging skin. This creature went over to the lumps and started pulling bodies out of the carpet. each one of the lumps was a person with a petrified look on their face, and they were curled up in the fetal position. They looked like they had been drained of their blood. I had a feeling this thing knew that I was in the room, but it never looked at me or acknowledged me. It just kept tending to these bodies. Then I woke up. This is what I commented under his story before. I've had that same dream 6 times. The first 5 times, it was the same as your dream, except I'm in a forest, not a room. It's really early in the morning, and there's just this vague sunlight coming through the trees. As I stand there, I also feel the need to hide suddenly, but without making any move, I'm suddenly sitting on a branch high up in a tree. As I sit up there, the same monster that you described comes in. Its skin is all gray and rotting, and it has rags that used to be clothes hanging off its body. The difference is that I'm sure it's not aware of my presence in any way. As I watch, it starts to dig into the ground. It digs up what looks like body parts of humans, and it buries them somewhere else. Time goes by very slowly, and all I can do is sit on the branch and watch him dig up these bodies and rebury them somewhere else. With every little move that this thing makes, an awful smell comes wafting up towards me, and it just won't go away. After what seems like hours, I wake up in my room in the morning, totally exhausted. But dream number 6 was different. In that dream, I opened my eyes, but I couldn't see anything. I smelled the scent of dirt all around me, but nothing else. After a while, I could hear the sound of someone digging. Then, rays of light came through the darkness. As my viewing window got bigger, I recognized that same monster, and I realized it was digging me up. But strangely, I wasn't scared. The thing digs me up and drags me through the forest. After a while, we reach an opening, and he puts me on the ground and just looks at me. We sit there for what feels like hours, and then finally the thing says to me, "It's done," and I wake up. Does anybody have any explanation for this? I'm no longer afraid, but I'm very confused, and I'd really like some kind of explanation.
I'm here to share my story about an entity known as the Hat Man. I'd never known this was something other people have experienced. It almost scares me more that other people have experienced this. But anyway, here it goes. My first experience was in my grandfather's house. I had a slew of weird experiences in this house. Always kind of credited those experiences to my great-grandfather, a butcher and vice president of the local butchers' union. The basement had clearly been designed for slaughtering pigs. A massive sink, floor drains, the works. I'd felt things watching me. I'd slept-walked and often woken up, standing in the corner of the basement. Really weird stuff. The worst experience, and I'm getting chills just sharing this, was waking up and looking into the hallway to see a pair of eyes staring back at me. I couldn't move, but I don't think I was asleep at this point. Before I knew it, something was on top of me, pressing into the couch, and it felt like something was sucking the breath out my body. And just as quickly as it had started, it went away. The second is recent. My grandfather passed away. I've had countless dreams about him, nothing specific, but this is the one that sticks with me. In this dream, we were in my house, sitting in the kitchen, just talking. Not about anything in particular, but just talking like we used to do. In the dream, I told him I needed to take a shower and get ready for work, and so I did. I had left the door open as I usually do, and during my shower I look into the hallway to see this black mass crawling down it. It stands. Its shape is human but long, Its fingers come to points and are hanging below its knees. It says, "You don't belong here," and I wake up. I've been thinking about why something like this would appear. The first experience sounds more like sleep paralysis, but the second, I'm not so sure. I feel like it might be something that comes to you when your dreams tread into the realms of the afterlife.
Happy Thanksgiving to everyone who's listening tonight. This year, one of the things that I'm very thankful for is Mortis Media. He's been so good to me, and I do so enjoy working with him. Thanks, Mort. And if you liked tonight's video and want to know a little bit more about me, I've put together this YouTube short that should tell you everything you need to know. Enjoy. Trouble sleeping? Need to relax? Listen to me every Thursday, and I'll read you some scary stories until you drift off to dreamland. Then, I'll rob your house. Daughter of Darkness, that's my channel and my name.